My name is Matt Williams. I am an evangelist at a small company probably a couple of you have heard of, Datadog. Any of you heard of it? Oh, yeah, there we go. Cool. So yeah, I work at Datadog. I've been there for about 5 years, and amazing place. But this session is not about Datadog. I will show 2 screenshots at the end. But other than that, it's not about Datadog. I just want to talk purely about AWS, Lambda, and X-Ray. So session is called Tracing the Black Box of Serverless. Now, if you have seen any of my presentations at any point in the last, say, 2 years, you will know that I like to start my technical sessions with a selfie. And so this is actually me. This is me and my wife. This is about 5 minutes after we met our newborn infant that we adopted on December 21st, 2018. So she's about 2 weeks old in that photo, but she's now 3 months and 4 days old. So just an hour or two before that, we went to the adoption agency, signed the paperwork saying that yes, this little girl is going to become our daughter. And she is a life-changing event. My life today is so much different than it was 4 months ago. In fact, I mean, paperwork took a year, and then we got this call just a week after we finished the paperwork. That is totally not normal, but we got the call a week later, and yeah, she's incredible. How many of you are parents in the room? That is a lot more than I would have expected. So that's awesome. Well, most of you know. I don't know why I didn't think that. Well, anyway, most of you know, except for the ones who didn't raise their hands, but the rest of you, all the ones that raise their hands, know that infants require a lot of feeding, a lot of tending to, a lot of holding that bottle to them and making sure you're paying attention, because as soon as you stop paying attention, it all ends up on your pants and shirt and everywhere, like she did when she threw up on my wife on the plane on 2 days ago, coming back from Detroit. But so we're spending a lot of time feeding our daughter. Every 2 to 3 hours, we're holding a bottle to her and hoping that she's going to drink, the full 4 ounces. We're up to about 4 ounces now, but it's sometimes more like 2 ounces, 2.5, 3. And so this is my life now. I've been full on. One of the, I guess, benefits of adopting versus giving birth to your own child is that both of us get to share the load. We both spend take turns waking up at 2 a.m. or 6 a.m. Or 5 a.m. to feed our daughter. And I thought it would be great, whenever we go to the pediatrician, they ask, well, how much has she been eating? How much has she been eating today or over the last week? And it's like, let's see, it's been averaging about 4 ounces per time. It's like 8 times a day. So we do the math and we figure out how much we're actually giving her. But we always get it wrong. So I decided that it would be really great to start tracking this stuff. And so I found a whole bunch of baby trackers online. Now, all these things, they basically allow you to track how many, was it a poopy diaper or was it a wet diaper? I didn't really care about that part. I cared about how much of this formula are we putting into our baby. Now, all these solutions, and there's, if you do a search online or on the App Store, you'll find many, many others that are out there. They all have one thing in common. Well, they have a few things in common, but the main thing that they have in common that's relevant here is that they all suck. They're terrible. They are built for the least common denominator of parents. So here is one example screenshot from one of them. This actually comes from Hatch Baby, but they're all pretty much the same. You open up the app. It's time to enter in how much has been fed. And I'm doing this at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. I'm really tired. I've just spent an hour holding this bottle to her head, and I just want to get the data in so I can go to sleep. I put in the number, I adjust the time to when it was, and I get down to left and right, and I'm like, This is not breastfeeding, this is a bottle. So I click on bottle, and it resets all my data. It's like, ah. And then all the different trackers do the same thing. It's super annoying. Not a big deal, but super annoying at 3 a.m. when I just want to go to sleep. So I thought, well, I can build a better app. I'm a technologist. I can do this stuff. So that's what I decided to do. I'm going to build a better app for me. So my name is Matt Williams. I'm an evangelist at Datadog, and you can reach me on email at mattw@datadoghq.com or Twitter. I'm techno-evangelist. Or I'm also on YouTube now. I'm a YouTube star. Well, soon will be. YouTube.com/techno-evangelist. I had one person come to me and say, they liked my channel. That was so cool today. Anyway, and in fact, my wife and I are going to build out a new channel about us adopting at our ages, which is a little bit older, and what that's like. So that's coming soon. So I decided to build an app using a tool called Coda. So Coda.io, it's kind of like Airtable or Notion, or there's a bunch of others. I really like what Coda can do. And here's what other people who are a lot more talented than me have produced using Coda. So that's pretty cool. And I decided I was going to use that as kind of my back end, where I'm going to store all my data, because then I can do some pretty charts later on. But this was going to be my overall architecture. I've got Coda, and I've got Lambda pushing into Coda, pushing the data into Coda. I could do this all in Coda, but I just wanted to have a little bit more flexibility. And then one of the benefits of having Lambda is that I'll have a RESTful API pushing into Lambda. I'll also be able to, at some point in the future, build out an Alexa skill. Hopefully Alexa's not listening anywhere because I've just activated her, maybe on the recording. Whoever's watching this, I'm sorry I activated your speaker. Anyway, so that's really great. I can do all that, and Coda is really great because they've got this amazing API that makes it super easy for getting data into and out of Coda, which is awesome. So basically, here's the process for getting data into Coda. I provide an API token. You can just log into my Coda account, get my API token from there, and then I make a call, RESTful call to get my document ID. It lists out all the documents. I can filter out just the one I want. And given that and the API token, I can get my table ID, or all the tables in my document, and figure out which one I really care about. And then I can pass all that information back to the API and get all the column IDs. And then I can use all that information I've now collected and push it into to post the amount of formula that I have just fed to our baby. I can post it that way. Now I'm about to show you some code, and I am thankful after watching the last session that I am only semi-clueless when it comes to developing for Lambda. So hopefully you'll take it. So here's my function I've written in Python. Basically, I've got some functions that will get my document ID, load up the amount from the event that comes in from Lambda. I'm going to get the table ID. I'm going to get the columns, figure out which columns I really care about, and post that to Coda. And if I take a look at, and then if I take a look at just one of those, so it's calling out a bunch of functions, not separate Lambda functions, just other functions within my .py file. I can see that I'm specifying the header and the URI and calling requests and returning a doc ID in this case, a document ID. So how do I use this? Well, I'm actually using on my iPhone, I'm using workflows. So I set up a workflow and then open up, shortcuts. Click on the bottles down at the bottom. It asks me how many ounces I am feeding my daughter. I've just fed my daughter. I put in the number of ounces, and I'm good to go. It tells me, okay, you're all set. And this ends up in my, not pretty yet, but will be pretty soon, my super simple baby data Coda document. So that's all there. That's actually all bogus data for this demo. But so all that data is being pushed into there. It works great. It really does. It works really, really well. There are no errors, and data shows up where it's supposed to, when it's all there. It all shows up as it's supposed to. But feels a little slow. I don't know why. I'm not really doing anything at this point in the presentation. I'm not really doing anything, tracking. I'm not monitoring it. I'm just building an application really quickly and taking a look at what's going on. But it just feels slow. So how do I find out where the problem is when there's not really a problem? There are no errors. Everything is going in the way it's supposed to. All the data is showing up in the right place where it's supposed to. How do I figure out where the problem is? And so this kind of brings me to the 3 pillars of observability. How do I find out what's going on in my application? Now there's 3 pillars of observability. The first one is metrics. Metrics are super important. It's not the only thing to look at, but it's one of 3 things to look at. One of 3 places that you need to look at for what's going on in your application. Metrics are really great for spotting those trends and patterns. How is things going today versus yesterday, or today versus last week, or noon versus midnight, or whatever it is. It's really great for setting alerts based on going over thresholds, and maybe that's a set threshold or a change percentage or some other anomaly detection. And it's great for catching all those known unknowns. These are things you know you need to look at. You're not really sure what the value is going to be. And so when I take a look at the Lambda console, I see a few metrics that are being collected for me right away. As soon as I create a Lambda, I'm collecting data about invocations, duration, errors, availability, and a few other things. So that's great. But maybe I want to start tracking some of the metrics for my application. I want to start collecting maybe the amount of formula that's going into our child. So I can very easily add a little bit of code that says, CloudWatch put metric data and specify the data object and push that into CloudWatch metrics. And that's definitely going to work. And if I go into the CloudWatch UI, I can see bottle amounts just for this test data. I see it's what it's been doing over the last few days or 15 minutes in this case. And I can see that all right there. Great. This is awesome. So what are the relevant metrics I can start feeding in here? Well, I already showed total ounces eaten, but maybe to figure out the performance, maybe I want to start timing each of those functions that I'm calling. Maybe start a timer at the beginning of the function, end the timer at the end, and then report out total amount spent. And I guess with a metric, I'll see it in aggregate. What is my average runtime for each one of these functions? So that could work. It feels kind of kludgy, and it's not very obvious how long things are taking because I'm looking at things in aggregate. Aggregate is useful sometimes, but not in this case, really. So looking at that second pillar of observability, we got logs. Logs are also another important source of information for what's going on within your environment or within your application. Logs are hopefully structured and easy to grep. Easy to grep for a human, but also easy to grep for a computer or a system. It's great for finding the details of something that happened. So the metric alerted you to there's a problem somewhere, and then you can find the details of what just happened in your logs. And it's great for catching all those unknown unknowns because hopefully a lot of data is going into your logs. Hopefully you're pushing as much data as you can into those logs, and whatever log aggregation tool you're using is going to help collect that and help find the stuff that you're looking for. And we have a UI inside of AWS that shows me the logs. And if you don't add anything to the logs, you're going to get 3 lines for each Lambda execution. You're going to get a start, you're going to get an end, and you're going to get a report. And report is going to show you duration, build duration, memory usage. It's going to show you a bunch of other things as well. But maybe you want to record some other stuff into those logs. Well, pretend that your function is just a console application. Just write a line to the console, and that's how you write to the logs. That's how you write to the CloudWatch logs. So in this case, I'm doing print columns for table and then table ID dash the dictionary of all the columns in my table. And when I take a look at the UI in the CloudWatch, I see right here, columns for table, and then the table ID, and then all the column data for this particular table. And that works great. It's not the sexiest UI, and I can't It's kind of hard to navigate through this, but it works. So what are some of the lines that I could be adding to my logs? I could add information about entry and exit times into each of those functions. Maybe the total time spent per each one of those functions. And maybe what is being collected by each of those steps. So maybe document ID for the document ID function and table ID for the table ID function. But it's still not all the data. It's still hard to find all the data that I really care about for my particular scenario where I'm trying to make my function a little bit faster. Again, everything works, so I'm not going to really see a lot of data in my logs or my metrics. I just want to know what's going on with this Lambda function. So the third pillar is traces. Traces are request-based. They'll follow the function across all the different functions and services. So when a request comes in, it touches this function, then that function, then that function, and comes back to the customer with a result. And a trace will look at all of those things and show them in one nice, easy to understand view, well, hopefully easy to understand view. And it helps to answer the question of where and how long did something take. And so in order to enable this in Lambda, I just go into the Lambda console, scroll down, way down, and you get to debugging and error handling. And I check that checkbox that says enable active tracing. That's all you have to do. Just check that checkbox. Okay, if you're using API Gateway, there's a separate checkbox under API Gateway, but set those two checkboxes and you're good to go. Now, if you're using a serverless framework, then it's just a matter of adding serverless plugin tracing and set tracing to true, and then manually going into the API Gateway and checking that checkbox manually because it doesn't do it for you. That's annoying. So, okay, so that's how I can enable tracing. And once I do that, I'm going to get a couple of views. I'm going to get this service map, which is kind of interesting. I get to see in aggregate what are the times for for all of my segments. But in my case, this is not super useful because again, it's the aggregate averaged across multiple executions. I really want to go into detail about one particular request. And so here's my first trace. So as soon as you add, all you have to do is just add that enable tracing, that checkbox, those two checkboxes. I'm going to get this data. I'm going to get this view. Now I see a few interesting things here. I see, I guess I could show you here. I see, oh, there we go. That little red exclamation point. Okay, so there's some sort of error with the API Gateway request. That turned out to be because that was a problem. I didn't really realize that everything worked, but I didn't send a response code back from my Lambda function, so the API Gateway wasn't able to tell did things work well or not. So once I figured that out, then it responded with a 200 and set the API Gateway to 200. And that calls calls Lambda, which calls my Lambda function. And I see there's this initialization time, and there's a little bit of time before that. So that's going to be initialization of the function and the cold start time. But then invocation is after that of my function. And if I run this again, I'll get rid of that initialization time and cold start time, and I just see really the pure function that's running. So this is really interesting. But it doesn't really tell me what's going on inside this function. It lasts for about 2 seconds, but I'm calling this third-party service 4 times, and I can't really, and depending on the internet and the speed of that service, it could be 2 seconds or 1 second or 5 seconds. So don't really pay much attention to 2.2, but I'd like to see more detail along here. So if I want to see more detail, how do I get more visibility into what's going on? I basically go into my, my code. Here's I collapsed them all. And all I have to do is add, in this case I'm using Python again, add some decorators, X-ray recorder, capture, and then what do I want to call it? And do that for all of my functions. And that's it. That is all I'm doing, just adding these, for my 5 functions, adding these 5 lines, just these 5 decorators. If I don't want to use decorators, it's a lot more complicated. But I can use decorators. And now I get this. OK, it's already a lot more usable. So I see my put bottle into coda, meaning put the amount in the bottle into coda right there. And then I've got my 4 functions that follow on after that: get document ID, get table ID, get columns, and post to Coda. Cool. So now I can see, each one of those little functions, they're taking about half a second. And they all have to go in series. And so, well, there's where all the time is being spent. Maybe I don't need to do that. I'm wasting a lot of time getting what are simply static values. The table ID and the document ID and the column IDs, they don't really change over time. They're always static. They're the same every single time I run it. So maybe I can just eliminate them. And this is where we see that I'm a little bit clueless about coding, because I'm adding, I'm hard coding my values in there, although I did it right with the OS, my environment variable at the top. But replacing all that logic where I'm requesting my document ID, and I'm just kind of hard coding it right there. And just by doing that, I'm able to shorten down my request into, and I can see it in my X-ray trace. Okay, so this is a really simple application, but hopefully you get the idea of what you can do with X-ray and traces on Lambda. But maybe I need more data. Maybe I want to get more information in that trace. Well, I can do that with annotations and metadata, and those are also super easy to add. All I have to do is X-ray recorder, put annotation and what my annotation is going to be, or metadata and what my metadata is going to be, and it's going to show up either here under annotations or metadata right there. And these are all within that same X-ray viewer. Now, what's the difference between an annotation and metadata? Well, annotations are indexed. So I can go into the X-ray, see all my list of X-ray traces, and say, only show me all the all the traces that have a table ID of that, or a user ID of something, or a URL of something. If I have lots of traces being collected over the last 5 minutes, I can just narrow it down to just the ones that I care about. And that happens with annotations. Metadata is just text that's saved with the trace. So why am I ever going to want to use metadata? Why would I not always want to use annotations? I can only use 50 annotations per trace. So probably keep the most important things up there and everything else in metadata, kind of like you'd use most of the time for logs. So that's one way to get additional information. Now I ran this again, having turning on all the bells and whistles, and I can get a trace that looks more like this, where I see my Lambda with each of the invocations of those other functions, as well as what are they actually calling out to. So it's calling out to Coda API and the full URL there. And I even see the amount of time that's, once it's being requested, how long is Coda spending on that request. And I see that client response. So I get a lot of information here. So that's pretty cool. And let's take a look at, I said I'd had a couple of screenshots from Datadog. So I just want to show what this looks like in the Datadog UI. Basically, we try to clean it up, and we should also realize that you don't want to just see your X-ray traces, you want to see your high-level metrics and your traces and your logs all in one view, and that's why we show all the information in one place. If I were to click on any one of those traces, I'll get a view that looks similar to what we saw in the X-ray interface, but hopefully a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer to look at, and as you hover over things, you see more data about what's going on. So hopefully that gives you a nice little introduction to what you can do with X-ray and how you can get started with X-ray. My name is Matt Williams. I'm an evangelist at Datadog. Again, here's the different ways to reach me. And I'll leave you with the most important thing to me right now, and that's Stella and Williams. Thanks so much.